Welcome everyone to another hobby desk. Today I'm making a fantasy bridge. So I imagine this is like just a regular fantasy game, something like Warhammer or Warhammer Age of Sigmar, Lord of the Rings, something like that. So it's a good scale. You know, you could use it for 28mm, 35mm. You don't have to just keep it in the fantasy genre. Obviously, you can use it in sci-fi and things like that. And this thing is made from household materials. Well, you know me by now. I do like my household materials. Keep that cost down so we can all hobby on a relatively low budget. And it's super durable, super lightweight, and a lot of fun to build. Okay, so let's get onto the hobby table, and I'll show you how this is made. So what do we need for this project? Well, I recommend cork. So you can use foam core if you like, and that's totally fine. It does leave a very good impression. If you roll, let's say, a rock on it, that's fantastic. But if you want a rattle can or anything like that, there's a chance that it could react with the rattle can spray. But I prefer cork purely because it's just as cheap and simple. There you go, chimple. I've made a word. So that's now copyrighted. So each time someone ever uses the word chimple, there you go. I earn myself some money. Okay. So with cork, like I said, it's cheap and simple. So you can use these cork little bits like this. So I think I've had some of these in videos before. I had a pack of 12, which are about a metre long, and I think they're about £5 or £6 from my local. I nearly said the name of the actual store, DIY store. So that you could use for pillars at the end of the bridge. So this bridge, I'm imagining it's going to be more of a fantasy bridge than, let's say I play a lot of 40k. It's probably not going to be sci-fi. I'm aiming towards fantasy, but hell, you can use it anywhere you like on the tabletop. So also what I like about cork is it's more forgiving, it's flexible. So I've got cork sheets here. I picked up 3 cork sheets, slightly bigger than A5, not quite as big as A4. Picked up 3 for I think it was about £6, so it was about £2 a sheet. You know, it should go a fairly long way. I have picked up, that includes, you know, postage and everything, but I have picked up sheet cork in home DIY stores and places like that in the past, a little bit cheaper than that. You know, you can get bigger, thicker sheets. But for this project, I wouldn't recommend much more than like 2 or 3 mil, because you want a bit of flex. So obviously underneath the bridge, it's a fair bit of an arch. Underneath the bridge, I don't really care too much what it looks like, but on the top side, I'm going to make flagstones. So I'm going to make these not too rough cut, because I do want them to go side by side and not leave any gaps in between, because if I leave any gaps in between, you'll see there is the wire. So the wire, so this was £1 many years ago when I had hamsters, and all I've done is cut the hooks off the end, for I no longer have hamsters. Cue sad face. And I have now got guinea pigs, yay! But they're a bit of porkers, they wouldn't get over the bridge. Anyway, so you can pick these up from pet stores relatively cheap. I mean, I'm not sure they're still £1, but they might well be. I mean, you can make your own cork bridge without this, but this is super lightweight, super durable, and with the cork on the top, which is unlikely to chip, very much like foam core would, you could pretty much throw this in the back of your car, ready for your gaming club or something. A little bit AOS, you know, put this on the table over a bit of water, not a problem. And it shouldn't chip, not quite so much anyway. So the idea is relatively simple. This, plus cork, and some paint, and hopefully we'll get ourselves a fantasy bridge. Right, I will get cracking with the cork. Okay, so the first part of my plan is to stick as much of this on their hole, on on the actual main top piece and underneath. Why is that? Because obviously I would go insane if I was just going to stick individual squares on this, and it would probably fall through. So I'm going to do it as a whole, and I'm actually going to score it because the texture is already there, because hey, it's cork. So unlike foam core, I could roll a stone across it, add some texture. The cork already has it. So what I'm going to do is measure up the width of the bridge and as much of this as I can fit on, and glue it side by side. Because funny enough, the sheets I have bought, I bought ages ago, and obviously with this bridge it's not the right length. But you can always measure up, a bit of forward planning, and get the right length. But for me, I'm just using up bits of what I got, because I like terrain with household supplies. A, keep it cheap, and B, it's a bit of a challenge. And you can say I made that for like £1 or something. Fantastic terrain for a couple of quid, I'm all in. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to measure up the main piece and then start sticking the main slabs of cork on. So I've measured, this happens to be 9.5 centimeters wide, 2 strips, like that. I've overlapped slightly, as you can see, because I want to bevel that eventually, and when the other bit underneath meets, they will have something a bit more to key to. But in the time being, you can see where I've joined it there. I'm just going to sandpaper it so it looks a little bit less obvious, and hopefully later on, when I start scribing in some detail, it may look a bit different as well. Right, okay, so as you can see, I've used some cheap and nasty super glue just to grab this cork to the metal, and that's fine. Now that probably won't come off, as cork is fairly absorbent as well. It's not like just a plasticky material. But what you may want to do is grab yourself a hot glue gun as well. So that stuff will grab stuff pretty damn sharpish, but I've got a hot glue gun here. You can see that with a little dab inside there, that stuff will bond quite nicely. So don't worry if you get all that little strandy stuff that you get with hot glue guns, it will eventually just break off, not a problem. So I will then mark up another 9.5 centimeters and do the bottom in the exact same manner. And you'll probably find with cork, you don't need a razor sharp knife. You can actually cut it with a pair of decent scissors. So, like I said, if you were using foam, you would have to have an extremely sharp knife, and you could tear if the knife isn't sharp enough. Whereas cork, as you can see, this is 3mm cork. It's not really much of a problem with a pair of scissors, so it is a lot faster to work with scissors rather than a knife. Okay, so once you've stuck the top bit and bottom bit, and like I said, a bit of hot glue is always good for this because it bonds it lovely. Makes a nice sandwich of hot glue. That's going nowhere, son. Right, next we do the sides. So for the sides, what do I mean? Well, funny enough, the sides. So we'll stick pieces along here, onto this bit, pieces onto this bit. So this bit here is slightly more fiddly because you have to stick it with a slight curve, whereas the bits on the outside, not really a problem, because you can just run a knife along there very carefully and cut off the excess, and same on the top. But on the inside, like I said, you have to curve it so it matches as near as you can anyway to this surface here. Okay, so what I also like to do with this is I like to do a billion different chunks of cork and stick on there, and it looks more like slabs, and that's great, but it does take forever. So if you want a relatively small bridge, that's fine, you can do that. A large bridge like this, it might take what seems like forever to stick little square pieces, rectangle pieces of cork on the side to make it look like a bridge pan, but it does look better. It really does. So what I am inclined to do is just do it on the sides rather than doing it on this piece as well, because you know it does take a long time. Now you could always use a sharp knife, like so, to carve your way into the cork once you've stuck it on the sides, for example, or even on here if you wanted to. And that's fine to make it actually look like a pattern as long as you don't cut too far in. And that might take as long as sticking the bits on the side. But if you wanted to stick the bits on the side, not like this, individual little squares, I'm going to show you how. And yes, it does take a lot longer, but it does look a lot more realistic. So what you want to do is cut some random squares and rectangles and stuff from your spare sheets of cork. So this kind of stuff now will come in handy. Or like I said, if you wanted to, just stick bits on the side and just run a knife and cut it off. It's totally up to you. But for me, I'm not going to cut and curve, cut and curve, cut and curve. I am literally going to take forever and cut up loads of random squares and chunks. Right, I will show you how. So, this is what I like to do. I've got loads and loads and loads of random cork sheets. So if you want to keep your fairly neat ones to one side, use them for future projects, or even basing materials. It's great for picking apart and sticking on a base. So I cut out some bits like so. So bigger bits, obviously, if you're sticking it onto this side of the bridge, won't take quite so long. Obviously, if you've got loads and loads of small bits, it will take forever and a day. So just have a bit of fun, make it as random as you like. See, those two bits are different sizes. I'm not measuring this at all. So, and they're probably going to go everywhere. But as long as you're cutting them at approximately 90 degrees angles, so you don't get any triangle pieces or anything like that. And cut them up like so. So I'll make a whole bucket full of them, and then I'm going to start sticking to the side of this piece. Okay, so I've done one side just to show you. So that's the outer, random, jaggedy. Actually looks kind of cool like that, but I want to make a functional bridge for a fantasy setting, not just one that looks random. Although I do like the randomness, it looks pretty cool. I'm not making it a ruin, I'm making it fairly neat. So what I have used is the hot glue gun. So I've put the cork like that just to build it up on one side, because I didn't want it to look too skinny, because these are supposed to be slabs of rock, remember, on a bridge. Although that being said, I personally didn't want the walls being too wide, because I still want it to be wide enough to put a decent amount of figures over. So functional, but also looks like a stone block wall. So it's going to be reasonably thick. Now I'm going to stick these chunks at the end of it eventually as well. So just maybe just the one either end. I don't think it'll go massively thick, but that's what I want for a minute. And then you get your old trusty old knife. So this is a cheapy old knife, certainly not what I would use to trim mold lines off miniatures, anything like that. So I want something with a fairly long blade, and I can get a pack of these, like 6 of them, for about £1 I think. So really dirt cheap. So it doesn't matter if this only makes it this project, but hey ho. And generally I don't pull it out that length, because when these start chipping or getting dull, you snap bits off segments. But I am getting it nice and long, because I want to trim all the way along here relatively smoothly, the same pattern as that white bit of metal there. And underneath I want to trim it so it's relatively smooth as the arch. So make sure you have an adult helping you here, and just take your time. It should cut fairly easy, because you've seen it cut fairly easy with a pair of scissors. So probably cut away from yourself, and don't lose any fingers if you can help it. So yeah, cut away from yourself. What I've done to glue the cork on the side, I've actually used the hot glue gun again, purely because it's pretty quick. I did try with PVA glue, and I thought, well, it took forever to dry with PVA glue. The PVA glue does dry hard, it's pretty good. And super glue, because this stuff is fairly porous, you wouldn't really think how porous it would be. You know, your wine doesn't pour out of a cork, of a bottle, but no, it is fairly porous, so super glue probably isn't the best for this. So something fairly thick and fast setting. I thought, okay, hot glue gun's pretty good. I get a lot of my stuff from Poundland, as you can probably imagine, for hobby. And a pack of, I think it was 12 sticks for like 50p or something. So hot glue gun, I use a mini one, little tiny one. You know, that's fine. You know, it doesn't have to be a super hot one. So just spend a bit of time tidying it up. So that's the rough shape. I might sand it a bit more with sandpaper, and I'll do the top in a minute. When that's all done, I will do the exact same on the other side. So rather than putting you through the pain of watching me glue bits of cork in a random fashion, I do like to stagger it a little bit to make it look like a stone wall, but I don't want to make it look perfect. I do want to make it look like a fantasy wall, not well made like dwarves make, obviously, just a random fantasy wall. Okay, so I'll carry on with the other side and come back when that is all done. Okay, so what I've done after I've stuck the side bits on and carved it off is I've put some flagstones randomly on the top there. Now I wanted it to be slightly wider than the walls. I might even put a few little slits in it to look like they're broken tiles. Now I didn't do it perfectly, so most of the tiles are the right size, and you get the occasional one there and there that are different sizes, because I want to look like this thing has been repaired over the years and not too perfect, because if it's too perfect then those would look a bit weird. So I wanted the bridge to be functional, not war torn and not blown up, things like that, which is a bit unusual for me because normally I make 40k kind of terrain. So if this was 40k, I'd probably have blast holes in this and whatnot. The good thing about cork is if you do super glue like this section here, and then quickly sand the nearby area, the sand goes onto the super glue, and it kind of makes a fairly seamless bond. So you know, cork is pretty good like that. And I've put 2 strips underneath to hide the joins. And this thing still, bear in mind, metal frame is super lightweight and relatively strong, so these bits aren't like to break off. I think the worst bits are probably going to be these, but with a good dollop of super glue they are firm to the touch. So hopefully they're not going anywhere, and you know, you could throw this around, not that you'd want to throw your terrain around, but you know, chuck it in a box to go to your local club and whatever, and it's pretty durable. I was thinking about making this from foam core, like I keep saying, and that stuff would not be so durable. Plus, if you use a rattle can, it would melt, and you know, that stuff does chip quite easily, although it does a good effect. But this cork's been really easy to work with so far. Hot glue gun, not a problem. You know, it's really easy to cut with a pair of scissors and whatnot. And what I've done is just put a little bit on the sides as well. Super glued those rather than hot glue, and then use that sandpaper technique to filler it in a little bit. I didn't want to make it too perfect, too neat, because this is going to be like a smooth kind of cobble, possibly, maybe some dirt, and it's going to be heavily worn, so it's going to be a lot smoother in my mind than this. So that's why I've got my older rugged cork on the sides for the walls, but you could use any cork you wanted to, and the smoother cork there. And if you really wanted to, you could always smooth that with a bit of sandpaper to tidy it up a bit. Or if you want to make it look rougher, maybe a couple of different thicknesses of cork, so it looks like some bricks are sticking out a bit further than others. But I'm not going to make it look too rough after I paint it up. I might put the occasional like grass tuft there. There is a spot there. I noticed there's a tiny gap I'm not massively happy with. So grass tufts will hide any errors. But I want it to look worn, used, but still very much in use and functional. So the tops of these aren't massively smooth. And they're all a bit higgledy-piggledy, but not too much. That's just my personal preference in this particular build, but use these techniques to make your own bridge and make them as badly beaten as you want. So what I'm going to do next is I am going to use a rattle can to seal this, so when I airbrush it, it's just going to be so much easier for the paint to take to it. Okay, so black rattle can time, and I'll come back when that's all dry. Okay, so it looks a little bit better with a rattle can on it. So I've just gone for a standard black primer, nothing too special, and I'm going to work my way up from there. So what I've done after that was quick blast over with a very, very dark grey with an airbrush, because I do not believe that inside of these cracks was going to be neat black. So that's what I've done. It's quite a dark grey. Of course you could use a grey primer, that's totally fine, but I just had a black primer can, why not? And you'll find there's lots and lots and lots of texture on cork, so make sure whatever you're using, you're probably better off with an airbrush or an actual good old-fashioned hairy brush to get in all those cracks, because a rattle can, well I did anyway, miss a lot of the cracks. So it's still a little bit shiny, it's still drying a little bit, but that's just a dark grey with an airbrush. Now, you don't have to use an airbrush, but I find for terrain pieces especially, it's just so much quicker. But you'll find if you were using a hot glue gun and you think you've got all those little tiny strands off, if you ever used a hot glue gun, you know exactly what I mean. And when you come to painting it, you'll find that there's an occasional strand somewhere that you haven't trimmed off. That's fine, just use a knife, cut it off as tidy as you can, and paint over. So the only negative thing I can see so far is I was a bit overzealous just slightly there with a knife when I was trimming the edges. The other side does look a little bit better, but I am totally honest with you guys. I'm going to show you all my flaws and mistakes as I go. Now the next stage is the fun stage. I prefer to dry brush. I mean, of course you could airbrush, I suppose, because at certain angles you'll pick up the highlight areas rather than getting in all the recesses. But dry brushing is quite fun. So work your way up with some natural rocky tones. By that I mean, when I first started making terrain, when I was about 12, I just painted all my rocky stuff grey. Now if you go out on a walk and you look around, you'll notice that not all rocks are grey. So if you are using an airbrush or whatever paint you're mixing on your palette for your dry brushing, I recommend dropping a little bit of brown in there possibly, or a little bit of green, and yeah, use those grey tones, that's fantastic, but just drop a bit of a different colour in there, maybe some slight yellow, like mustardy kind of colour every now and again. Not massively, but just a bit of a hint. Or if you do dry brush this up grey, you could always drop an ink on the occasional block or something like that. Just slightly watered down, or use a bit of medium. So let's say I would dry brush it all, and I would pick out one slightly different colour there, and slightly different colour there. And that's what I'll do next. I'll get the old dry brush out, and I'll start attacking it and showing you on camera what I mean. Okay, so for this, grab yourself a decent dry brush. So I've got myself my very own favourite makeup brush, because you know I like to look fabulous, and just use a generic grey. So I'm going to put a little bit on a tile like I normally do, and I'm going to rub off the excess on a bit of tissue. So this is going to be a fairly heavy dry brush, so I want to get most of the detail on the first pass. It's not going to be too dry, if that makes sense, for a dry brush. So next time around I'm going to get it a lot lighter than that. And obviously the bigger the dry brush the better. A, it's faster to rip through the piece of terrain. B, you're just picking up the utmost edges. Rub it into my bit of tissue. There we go. You get the idea. I'm not trying to make it look too even either. That looks a bit brighter there, it's not a problem. Later on I'll start adding some washes and different colours. Don't want to make it look too uniform because each block is going to be a slightly different colour. So just working that along. And the next time around, like I said, it'll be a bit lighter again, as in colour, and also not so much on the brush. And like I said a minute ago, I'm going to go a little bit of a lighter colour and a little bit of a lighter dry brush. So this is going to be on the topmost edges. I'm not going to do it underneath. Just to make the edges pop a little bit. And of course, like I said, you could do it with a airbrush, just like the centre of each panel if you wanted to. But I am just going to catch the occasional stone here. So that one's going to be a little bit brighter than those two. I'm going to make it look a little bit random. Just like that. Don't them all looking the same. Same on the other side. Not spending too much time on it, making it look a bit natural, a bit rough. Just catching the edges on the top as well. And stop when you think you've had enough. I'll do a little bit on the inside. A big block there. And a little block there. Carry on finishing this off, and then it gets to the stage where do you want to add a few washes to some of these slabs, some blues, some greens, just to make it look a bit more realistic, because you don't want them all looking too much the same. So just get some weird and wonderful colours. I've got some browns, some dirty greens, things like that. Put a little bit on your palette, a little bit on your brush, and just work it on a piece of tissue, so until you get to about that stage. So you're picking up the texture on the tissue, and let's just hit one or two slabs here. So it just gives the hint of a colour. Like I said, you could always use washes and things like that. So that one there has obviously got a bit of a brown to it. That one's got a tiny bit of a green and a bit of a green. And you know, just make this bridge as dirty as you want. You know, it's going to be used, it's not going to be clean, and it's going to be years old. So what I'm going to do in a second, is I'm going to put some weathering powders, just a little bit here and there, and some tufts of grass, like I said previously, in a few of the cracks. Maybe hides a few of the mistakes, things like that. But yeah, just get a bit creative, a bit random. Don't make it look too uniform. Some different browns, some different tans, some greens, maybe even some blues. You're never going to get the same colour rock twice. So just like that, have a bit of a play. So it's just about noticeable, like so. Okay, so there you have it. All I've done is added a little bit of this algae stuff, which was from a Train Hobby supply, which is great because you can really rub this stuff in and it can stain the material, or you can put a little bit of super glue or PVA glue in the crack like I've done there and just stick it in. I've done a few little tufts in the cracks inside, a little patch of grass there, a little patch of grass there, things like that just to break it up a bit. So you don't want all the patches of grass and moss and things like that to be a bit too uniform. And I've used my good old faithful bit of weathering compound there. So just put that in there. And a few different pigments as well. I haven't gone too heavy on the pigments for once. If you've seen any of my videos previously, you know I love this stuff. I could do more. You could always come back afterwards and add a bit more to it, which I probably will do on this bit here. I think it's maybe a tad too clean for a well-used bridge. But no, really happy with it. So ultra lightweight, very durable. Looks rugged, but without being, falling apart or anything like that. And it's super cheap to make. I mean, the bridge itself, I've hoarded, obviously, for a long period of time, but it cost me about £1. And the cork sheets in total, I probably spent just over £1 maybe on the cork, possibly. But yeah, it's always cheaper to buy in bulk. And a hot glue gun, I think it was like 50p's worth of sticks I used. So for the sake of definitely under a fiver, yeah, another cheap piece of terrain made from household bits. So yeah, really happy with this bridge. Yeah, if this thing's your kind of thing, if you like sci-fi pieces, fantasy pieces, stuff like that, made from household materials, please check out our previous videos because there's lots on there. It's definitely my thing. So, if you like this video, please hit the like button. If you haven't done already, please subscribe. And if you dislike it, please let us know because we can make improvements on the channel. Cool. Hope you guys are keeping well and keeping safe. Thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video.